other podcasters who are doing this live. Okay,
Yeah.
there's an error actually. Let me see. An error occurred, but I think it's fine. Just Facebook. Let's go live. Let's try again. Ready to go live. So
Okay.
anytime now, yeah, we're live. And
We're live.
ladies and gentlemen, Corny
Exciting.
Koehl.
How are
Really
you,
exciting
Wayne?
for me. Yeah, greetings from Singapore. And where are you exactly right now? Tell us where you're residing in and what's been happening for the past 1 week. Give us an update.
Greetings from Southern California, from my parents' homestead in Tustin, California. I have been down in Orange County with my parents for the last 2 months. I live normally up in Burbank, California, but during the lockdown, I've been down here and I've been the designated grocery shopper. That has been my number one primary job during this quarantining.
That's really exciting. And of course, the world has gone weird, right? Especially the past 7 days.
So weird.
Tell us exactly what's the latest update and what's the latest, happenings that you've been observing around your neighborhood.
It's been just devastating with the COVID-19, the lockdown, everybody being in quarantine and not really getting out and being able to express themselves or communicate with people as they normally would have. And then 10 days ago, the tragic death of George Floyd has just, it's such a tipping point for our country. There's just, marches all over. Everybody, there's just such deep sadness and an amazing amount of camaraderie across all the races. Because this is about Black Lives Matter. And there are a lot of Asian, white, all races are coming together to say out loud that Black Lives Matter. And it's a strange time, and we have to see change happen because it feels, it's weird with the COVID and being locked down and having so much change happen so quickly. It feels like this is the revolution. This is a revolution. How is it in Singapore? Do you see marches there? How are the people expressing themselves? Because I know this is international.
Yeah. In fact, I think they have marches all over the world. Paris, London, I think New Zealand is going to have one this weekend. Australia as well. Singapore, I haven't heard of anything yet, but I think it's just a matter of time. Normally, it takes time, slightly longer for things to really get going in Singapore. But, I'm seeing more and more hashtag Black Lives Matter or Justice for George Floyd popping up on my newsfeed from my Singaporean friends. So we're getting more aware, definitely. We're more observant as well. So we're definitely, gonna also join in terms of, doing peaceful protesting together. I think with the rest of the world, I think unity is strength, right? And it's the best time to show solidarity during this crisis as well. So I think this is a great time for me to also maybe segue into telling, our audience of the CMO Asia podcast. Most of our listeners are all over the world, and many of them are CMOs and CEOs. 80% of them are actually in Asia. And long-time listeners, they know that we usually get like a senior marketing leader, CMO, CEOs, entrepreneurs. But this week, because of Black Lives Matter, the CMO Asia podcast, we're using this live stream and podcasting feed to signal boost, social justice content creators like you. And our podcast believe that Black lives really matter, and we will continue to amplify voices that are so often silenced. And I reached out to you, Corny, on LinkedIn a couple of days back.
Yep.
And how I actually found you, right? I think a little bit of backstory. I used the hashtag podcast blackout. I was so interested to find out, which other podcasters out there are also, joining in this movement. So I asked you, and I DM you basically and asked you whether you would like to come onto the podcast and chat about Black Lives Matter, as well as Justice for Jarvis, which is a movement that you started, right? So for the listeners, before we let you talk for the next 5 minutes about Justice for Jarvis as well, you have executive produced a lot of great radio shows and podcasts, yeah, including for Oprah Winfrey.
Yes.
And you have also just launched a podcast series that is called Dear Governor. And it's the story of a black man, Jarvis Master. So Jarvis has been incarcerated in San Quentin prison since he was 19 years old for armed robbery. And then he was wrongly accused for years later of participating in a conspiracy, right? Inside the San Quentin prison in the death of a prison guard. So he's been on a death row ever since. And you have actually introduced Jarvis, to the rest of the world, to me especially. And I've got a confession to make. I've actually never followed any true crime podcast until I researched on your podcast show during Black Lives Matter week. And, the last time I actually consumed any content related to true crime was actually a Apple Plus show. I think it's called True Be Told, which is a series based around a podcaster, a true crime podcaster. And Aaron Paul, from Breaking Bad was in that show. So that's how I actually discovered there's a genre of true crime podcasting. Until, I discovered your show. I listened to it intently since last night. And I really love the bonus episode, especially when you call in to Jarvis and ask him about his take about Black Lives Matter and what's going on, in this weird world that we're living in right now. So, of course, Dear Governor is something that's really personally transformative for you, right? It's the best thing that you have ever done. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, it is the most I have produced for many major nationally syndicated radio shows and personalities and people who have done wonderful things with their lives. But in this particular show, this has transformed me because it has forced me, I grew up maybe 20, 30 miles from where Jarvis did. And Jarvis and I are contemporaries. And he grew up in a home where there was no electricity. His mother was a prostitute. His father was extremely abusive. And I live in a, all white enclave that's very right-wing Republican. And never, ever would I have thought, like back in high school, that there were people that lived that close to me that didn't even have electricity. It was not even fathomable. And so I was introduced to Jarvis. It was back in 2014 when I was producing for Oprah. And a woman by the name of Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist nun and a best-selling author and a teacher. She's beautiful. Oprah interviewed her, and Pema gave me 2 books that Jarvis had written because he's a devout Buddhist as well. And she wanted me to give those to Oprah. I gave them to Oprah. Oprah wanted to interview Jarvis. But unfortunately, after we tried, we could not get any media on death row at San Quentin. San Quentin, by the way, is in Northern California, and it's the only prison in California that actually, there he is. There's Jarvis. It's the only prison in California that executes its prisoners, male prisoners. And there are 737 men on death row in California right now. And so, anyways, long story short, we couldn't get Oprah up there because they did not allow media on death row. I kept in touch with Jarvis. We've talked on the phone hundreds of hours. And I started thinking, what can I do to help him and help his cause? Because just so you know, the Jarvis has maintained his innocence from the get-go. There is new credible evidence that points to his innocence. There are legal scholars, legitimate, high-level legal scholars who believe him to be factually innocent. And so we really want to bring his story to the public, and we want this story to blow up. And the reason we're calling it Dear Governor is because it is literally an open letter to Governor Newsom, because we want Governor Newsom to look at Jarvis's case and re-look at it and see what's going on there, because it is an injustice. It's an injustice. And just Governor Newsom in March of 2019 actually put a moratorium on the death penalty in California. It was still legal in California, but he put a limited moratorium on it. based on the fact that he believes, based on scientific fact, that there are innocent people on death row. So the National Institute of Sciences, for instance, projects that at least 4% of people on death row are innocent. And so Jarvis, who is the main voice of this podcast, he poses the question. He says, how many guilty men have to be put to death to justify the execution of one innocent man? And so we on the show asked that question. And, so this is, as far as Black Lives Matter, this is the ultimate. I mean, capital punishment is the ultimate racist machine.
This is a great, summary of what your show is all about. And I was enthralled, when I was listening from the first few episodes that you have published so far, especially the bonus episode where I could hear his voice, right from inside the prison, and you're communicating to him via a mobile phone, right? So I also know that there's a co-op piece that he has written for Guardian recently, where he was talking about why it makes more sense, especially during the pandemic, right? And also during Black Lives Matter and all these weird things that are all going around the world right now. It's even more important for inmates to be given a mobile phone to stay connected with the outside world. What's your hot take on that?
Without a doubt, that's true, because the number one thing that prevents recidivism, prevents prisoners from going back into prison, is their connection with their family. And if they don't have that connection, that they are just going to get angrier and angrier. And there are ways, I know that a lot of people criticize the concept of having cell phones in prison, and justifiably. You don't want a bad guy in prison to be communicating with somebody on the outside and doing crime on the outside from the inside. But there are monitoring systems that can prevent that from happening. And so it just seems like, Jarvis, because he has been in San Quentin for 40 years, I think a little bit more than 40 years. And he remembers back 20, 30, 40 years ago when it was so violent there. Like, there were daily uprisings, and guns were used all the time to keep the prisoners in line. And Jarvis said back then, if the corrections officers came in and did a search in their cells, they would find shivs, weapons, drugs. Jarvis says, and he wrote about this in the article you were referencing. There was recently a raid, and they found like 60, 70, 80 cell phones that otherwise would have been knives. So would you rather have them communicating with their parents, with their children, and keeping a level head, or would you rather have them fighting? I think it's a no-brainer. And you take that into the fact that, so the system that Jarvis talks to me on, that you will listen to on the podcast, is called GTL. And I have to pay money into that, and keep money in there for Jarvis to call. And then Jarvis calls from the prison phone, and we're monitored, which the same thing would happen on the cell phone. And we get interrupted every 5 minutes, and then we get cut off every 15 minutes. So to do the podcast, he keep calling back. But it's expensive. It's expensive for me. And to think about, people who are very, do not have much money at all, they can't keep money in there. And so therefore that their relative is isolated all the much more.
Thanks for this insights, especially the background of how you actually produce the show, how you make even this show possible. And of course, there are so many hurdles and challenges that you need to overcome in order to just get more sound bites from him, right? And of course, with the intent and the goal, obviously, of overturning this conviction. So, yes. Can I say that what set your true crime podcast, apart, from the other podcast shows of the same genre, is that you're fighting for a real cause right here, someone that you're really really close to right now, because he's someone that was introduced to you by a mutual friend, right? By this
Yep.
a book author. And while you're doing the show, do you feel that it's just imminent, just a matter of time before he finally see freedom, which is what he deserved?
I pray that that's true, but the criminal justice system in America is broken. It's broken. And earlier this year, 3 months ago, 44-year-old man named Nathaniel Woods was executed, despite the fact that there was evidence of innocence, despite the fact that so basically his story, so Nathaniel's story, was that he was at a drug house. Cops came, knocked down the door, and he was with a friend of his who had a gun, who had an AK-47 on his lap. The cops came, knocked down the door. There were 4 of them. According to Nathaniel, he dropped to his knee to, give in to them. But his friends started thinking that they were being attacked and thinking that they were going to be killed, started shooting, in his mind, out of self-defense. Nathaniel never held the gun. The guy who shot the cops said Nathaniel had no knowledge that this was going to go down. But nevertheless, he was killed. So innocent people are killed on death row. Innocent people are. And since 1973, there have been, I want to say 100, I have the number here, 168 men and women have been, who were on death row, have been exonerated. So that means they have been found to be innocent. And that's devastating. That's devastating. And these people, and that was what our special Black Lives Matter show was about, to show how disproportionately Black and brown people are put on death row. If you are, this blew my mind. If you're Black, you're 4 times more likely to be put on death row than if you're white.
Wow.
I mean, that is just so broken. And so, yeah, Jarvis, he's one of my best friends. I talk with him probably more than anybody, and I adore him. And he is a peaceful, kind, funny, insightful, funny man. But you just never know. There's so many injustices, and that's why it's so broken. It's got to be fixed. And I think there's something that is called Thurgood Marshall was the first Black Supreme Court justice, and he is the only Supreme Court justice who litigated capital cases. And there's something that is called the Marshall hypothesis. And the Marshall hypothesis is, the more you know about the arbitrary nature of the death penalty, the less likely you are to support it. So what we're doing with this podcast, we don't ask you to believe Jarvis or not to believe Jarvis. That is not, you can't believe Jarvis after just 8 episodes. Nobody can. But I mean, the more you know about the facts of the justice system, that we are laying out the facts in the show through the life and through the eyes of Jarvis. And so we challenge the listener to really engage. If nothing else, they will meet an amazing person in Jarvis, who's an incredible author. He's written 2 autobiographical books, incredibly entertaining. But at the most, they'll question their own beliefs about the death penalty. For me, my entire life, I believed in the death penalty. I just figured, yeah, it killed terrible people in the world that are doing heinous crimes. Let's get rid of them. I figured it probably saved us money, right? Kill them, they're gone. But capital punishment, it is more expensive by hundreds of thousands of dollars to execute somebody than to have them in life without the possibility of parole. So it just makes sense to me that it's such an important topic that people should examine their own belief and then make the decision for themselves.
That's fantastic. And of course, I need to ask you this question after, listening to the bonus episode, right? Yesterday night. What exactly did Jarvis Masters has to say about the dire circumstances of COVID-19 in prisons right now? Because I understand that you called in and you spoke to him about this topic, right?
Yes,
For the benefit of those who hasn't listened to the podcast, can you give us some of what he has spoken about regarding the dire circumstances right now of this pandemic inside the prison?
Yes. Well, the prisons all across the country, COVID is exponentially worse there because they are not. It's you can't physically distance in a prison. If you're on a bunk with several men, you just are not able to physically distance, and our prisons are so packed. And also, many of the prisons don't even allow hand sanitizers because there's alcohol in there, and therefore that is prohibited. And so it is a dangerous, dire circumstance. And I asked Jarvis about it, and his answer left me stunned. I said, are they testing you there? What's going on? And he said, there are people left and right in prison that he hears coughing, that are hiding their illness from the corrections officers because they're afraid, because if they are sick, they get sent down to solitary confinement. They're not being tested. They're not using, and so the prisoners therefore are incentivized not to be honest. And that probably is contributing to why there is an exponential rise of COVID in prisons. It's scary.
So I'm sure he has access to some information, right? He reads the newspapers, probably has some TV time as well. He knows that the pandemic, has basically turned the world upside down. And of course, the murder of George Floyd as well has initiated this Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, you have a chance to speak to him about, this current news and of course the situation right now. Can you tell us what Jarvis actually spoke about regarding the vitality of this Black Lives Matter movement, and also about the loss of George Floyd, and also in terms of the racist criminal justice system, right?
Yes.
So what are his take on the current situation in the world right now?
It's surreal for him to be on the inside because, and they watch, like where you and I, especially during this COVID time, if we feel just too much influx of negative information, we can clear our brains, we can get out. But what the prisoners, they sit and 24/7, they've got the news feed going, and so they're seeing the mayhem first of all with the COVID, and now the marches with George Floyd. And he said that he feels like he is inside looking out and history is being made now. He said he watched, and this broke my heart. He said he turned on the news and he saw George with the cop on his neck. And he said he looked at that and he said he knew what that felt like. Because he is a Black man and he has been under police oppression before. And I just felt like how many, I can't even relate. I don't even know how, I don't think we can relate without that life experience. But, we just want to, me as a white girl, want to support in any way that I can. And, that helping to be a conduit to tell Jarvis's story has been just a blessing for me because it's an important story.
And we could see, we could hear from your passion as well, especially your compassion for Jarvis Masters. Of course, the reason why you're doing this show in the first place and what's driving you to continue to roll up riveting episodes like the ones that I heard, while researching for this podcast. This is definitely the most remarkable thing that you've done in your career, right? And you've done so many great stuff and content over the years, especially doing TV shows for Oprah Winfrey and winning, 2 Emmy Awards as well while you were, doing all this fantastic content. And tell us, what has been the biggest highlight of your career so far? Is this currently the biggest highlight?
Biggest highlight? Golly. It was, I don't know if this is the biggest highlight. It is the most transformative, the most moving, the one that I would never trade away versus any other. But I think highlight, if I define highlight as far as that which I enjoyed so much and it inspired me so much, I would have to say producing a show. It was when I ran Oprah Radio for something like 8 years. And so I was the executive producer there. And I co-created a show with Oprah called The Soul Series. And basically during the, when she was doing her TV show, she would do 2 TV shows across the street. And our radio station was catty corner from the television studio. And then in the evening, she would come over by herself, sometimes with her dog. And she would come into the studio and it would just be me and it would be my board op and it would be Oprah. And then she would interview guests, phenomenal individuals. And the fact that I got to interface with some of these people that she spoke with that are world leaders, thinking outside of the box, amazing people, religion to spirituality to business, and that I got to help create that. And that was actually, that was the brainchild. That's what Super Soul grew out from. So Super Soul Sunday was a TV show that started as a radio show, which was called Soul Series. So I'd say that was the highlight because that changed me in so many ways, talking to these people, Wayne, what you do, like the fact that this podcast is about inspiring and the fact that it can be, because there are a lot of inspiring or that claim to be inspiring that aren't necessarily entertaining, and to be able to bring those 2 elements together is a beautiful thing. And I felt like that's what we did with the Soul Series.
And we definitely have to congratulate you, on a success of a social justice podcast. Dear Governor, I think it's currently up to 109th position on the Apple Podcast chart. So well done. And of course, in terms of what are your takes in terms of moving, humanity forward with your podcast, in terms of moving humanity forward with Justice for Jarvis and Black Lives Matter? Can you comment on that?
Just pushing this is my little part in that movement. It's more than a movement. It is a revolution, and I am sticking with Jarvis. This is season 1, but we're gonna take it. My goal. This is my goal. This is my prayer, is that I'm going to be hosting a giant freedom party for Jarvis when he gets out. A giant freedom party.
That would be an awesome day, for sure.
It would be. I've told Jarvis that, and he's like, yeah, I want that.
Because when I listened to the podcast, it was so riveting and also really thrilling for me to hear his voice, when it's inside. And I'm all the way here in Singapore, I'm able to actually connect with him by just listening to his stories and listening to the compelling way where you're getting sound bites from him, and your interviewing style is also really inspirational for me, inspiring for me, and there's a lot of great things that I can learn from the way you interview him. And of course, it's great on so many levels, and I think the timing as well is culturally it's very relevant. Of course,
Wayne, if you freejarvis.org. Freejarvis.org is his website. So if any of your viewers or listeners are interested in learning more about Jarvis, go there. It's got his whole case. It's got his stories. It's got links to his books, because his writing is really lovely.
Below,
Great.
yeah, that's the
Look at you. You're fancy.
Everybody, go to the website, and of course, there are many ways where they can chip in and help, right? Not just being a mere listener, yeah.
Our our call to action, if you go to freejarvis.org/podcast, there is a petition there where you can fill in your name and email address. And that is a petition that we want to get to Governor Newsom. And basically, if you read it, it's just asking Governor Newsom to take a double look at Jarvis's case and the unusual circumstances about the case.
Thank you so much for, highlighting this great podcast series to our listeners who otherwise, there's no way to find out about it at all. I think this Black Lives Matter movement has already created a lot of positives. Of course, it's not just a peaceful protest. And of course, over-communicating, the need to have justice for George Floyd, for the likes of Jarvis as well. We're going to ask you this. We are almost hitting the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to spit things out a little bit. Has there been any series based around podcasting that recently caught your attention? I'm going to share, 2 podcast-related TV series that really caught my attention. One is the Midnight Gospel on Netflix. It was...
okay.
Yeah, it's about a podcaster. It's an animated series. It's a really trippy show where, animated podcaster actually travels around the multiverse in sort of like a simulator machine. So it's a little bit of a fantasy as well. And he travels to the multiverse in different planets and get to basically grab anyone that he sees on a mysterious planet to join him on a podcast and get interviewed. And that's why he actually gets to find out a lot of the answers to the big questions in life, like, how do you deal with death? What's the meaning of meditation? And of course, all these things that are really relevant, in this crazy world that we're living right now. Yeah. And that's the Midnight Gospel on Netflix. The other one that caught my attention was definitely Truth Be Told. That's the Netflix, the show, the Apple Plus, a show that basically introduced me to this wonderful world of true crime genre in terms of podcasts. And that's how I actually found you after that. So series based around podcasting recently that caught your attention as well?
Yes, I just finished, I binged Something About Pam. And it is a true crime it is just outrageous. And it's anywhere you get your podcast. It is amazing and phenomenally done, and the quality is cool. And it's, if you've got a long drive ahead of you, binge on Something About Pam. My favorite podcast, I'm a really big fan, as are millions of people, of The Daily, the New York Times Daily. So basically, if you have not listened to that, they deep dive into a big story every day, and with the journalists who have covered those stories, and it just helps you just keep your mind sharp about all of the important things that are going on now, and following all of the important stories. For comfort and for entertainment, my favorite podcast in the whole wide world is called Satellite Sisters. And that actually, I used to produce it back. They started it 20 years ago, and they're 5 sisters, and they broadcast from different locations. So one of the sisters broadcasts from Moscow, Russia, one from Oregon, one from New York, and 2 from LA. And so they would all come together on the radio and talk with one another about things that are relevant to women in their lives. And it has since evolved into a podcast, and it is one of the most quality podcasts out there. And that's with the Wondery Network. So I'm a huge fan of podcasts. I spend a lot of time in solitude, and I like having a little distraction from the voices in my head.
This is fantastic. I think the recommendations are brilliant. I'm going to check out all these 3 podcast shows that you just recommended to me and our audience.
Okay.
So this week was, in solidarity with the Show Must Be Paused, right?
Yep.
So 2 of us actually didn't publish any new episodes of our shows this week, on Tuesday especially. So how did you spend your Tuesday? Was it spent educating yourself on the Black Lives Matter movement? Or tell us, walk us through what happened during that Tuesday for you.
That Tuesday, that's when I spoke with Jarvis. So that's when we were able to produce the show our normal drop is Thursday. So we had episode 5 was going to drop on Thursday, but we thought let's agitate, and let's let's push away what normally would land on that, and let's talk about something that is relevant to what's going on in the world right now. And I thought nobody better to weigh in on that than Jarvis.
So we're going to segue into the next question on Black Lives Matter, right? Especially hashtag Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. How can we actually help to amplify and learn from Blacks' voices? In your opinion, how can all of podcasters or content creators, or even just normal civilians from living in the rest of the world, in other parts of the world, how can we help to amplify and learn Black voices?
I think number one, listen and not talk. I think speaking as a white person of privilege, I tend to talk more and don't listen enough. And I want to give you a recommendation. I'm looking here on LinkedIn because I have an excellent recommendation for us all. Stand by. Okay. Let's see here, June 9th and 10th, 9 Eastern, Oprah is going to be speaking. There's going to be 2 days where she is going to be engaging with many major high-level thinkers in the Black community to what's next. How can we change? And so this is going to be broadcast on her own network, but it's going to be across all Discovery. It's going to be simulcast across all Discovery network channels. And so it's going to be international. And so I think, that is a good starting point. Listen to people in the know with great ideas about how we can help. And I'm definitely going to be tuning in and eating my popcorn and watching and listening.
That's a great show or great event, to look out for. And thanks for, highlighting that show so that we can all tune in as well, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So we have about 10 minutes left. So normally I'll do a speed round, a rapid fire round. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Bring it, Wayne.
Try not to overthink your answers, okay?
Okay.
Yes. A podcast that you cannot live without.
The Daily.
Your favorite podcaster.
Satellite Sisters.
Your most admired producer.
Donna Fazzari. She is my partner in crime, and she helped me put this together.
Who would you recommend following? Name us 3. You can be either a podcaster or a producer.
Okay, Maggie Haberman, who is a journalist for the New York Times. I'm going to say Gayle King, who is the CBS morning anchor, just because she has so much spirit and is so humble and is so engaged. And I guess the third person, I'm going to say Liz Dolan. So Liz Dolan is one of the Satellite Sisters, and her Twitter is @SSLiz. And just because she is so incredibly thoughtful as well and engaged. So those would be the 3 that I would follow.
If you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that is good. I'm going to say who and why. Okay, I would say number 1, it would be my grandmother. So Wayne, as I told you, and she is not alive, and I never met her because she died. I think my mom was about 14, but I was named after her. So my full name is Cornelia, but I go by Corny, and I was named after her. And I would love to sit down and have dinner with her and pick her brain and get to know her, because from what I understand, she was an amazing lady. I would say that. I would also love to sit down with Stephen Colbert, because I just think he's phenomenal, and he has kept me sane since 2016 with his amazing humor and wit, and I would love that. And then I guess who would be my third person? I was going to say like Gandhi, but that's I should say somebody like Gandhi. Let's see. I would say, you know what? I'm going to say Ava DuVernay. Ava DuVernay is a director, and she is so the movies that she has done, the TV that she has done, is so purpose filled that I would like to squeeze a little wisdom out of her over a glass of Pinot Noir.
Brilliant choices, especially Stephen Colbert. I'm also a big fan. I think he's the best thing since David Letterman. Yeah,
I do too. He's unbelievable. But all the late night guys are. Jimmy Kimmel is just really kicking it. Seth Meyer is kicking it. They have stepped up their game, and that's amazing considering they're doing it from home. It's a whole different experience now watching them without a live audience, because generally when you have a live audience, it's almost like canned laughter, and that elicits more laughter in you. But not having an audience, it strikes to the seriousness of the situation, and I think it's working beautifully.
Brilliant. Can you remember the first podcast that had an impact on you when you first started?
First podcast. Okay, Caliphate with that was from the New York Times, and just an astonishing story. You can still listen to it now, but I would say that was probably the most impactful.
LA or New York?
LA, baby. I've lived in New York. I've lived in New York, and I love New York, and I love New Yorkers. I do. I've lived in Chicago. Chicago in the United States is the second city, second to New York, but Los Angeles is my home. I love it here.
Brilliant. Cardio or weights?
Cardio all the way. I did my Peloton today for 45 minutes, and I was a sweaty mess.
Cola or lemonade?
Oh, cola. I'm all about the bubbly.
Fantastic. What else do we have going on that you want our listeners to make sure they will be on the lookout for?
Well, I would love you guys to listen to our podcast. I mean, that is my goal with this. But also, follow Jarvis, follow his story, become a part of the solution for him. I mean, it's one person at a time that we can help, and just uplift him.
This is fantastic. So we're going to end this episode right here. Thank you so much for sharing, what you're doing, your intent and your purpose as well, and a fantastic story with us. Yeah. And we definitely enjoy talking to you today. So we're going to finish this episode right here. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Wayne. I really appreciate you. You're wonderful.
Thank you. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
You got it. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.